afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the May 10th version of the Kiwanis Club of Easton weekly meeting. Please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
God bless America.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thank you, everybody. Please take your seats. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Jillian Cabrera. Jillian comes from the Center for Humanistic Changes, and this is a organization that educates and supports people in all sorts of substance abuse and addiction-related issues. And I know Lisa Wolf. She's been very active in the Opioid Awareness Task Force, and what a great organization they are. They take information into schools. They're famous for their mock teen bedroom, where they're able to show where people hide things.
As he said, my name is Jillian Cabrera. I do a lot of prevention types of presentations, a lot in schools. So this is a little bit of a newer crowd for me. But we have been tasked by Northampton County to do more presentations on gambling issues, gambling addiction, gambling prevention, those types of things. So this is our newest one. You guys are actually the first group to see it, so hopefully it goes well. I am going to talk fairly quickly just because of time. So I know we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions. So if you need me to go back on anything or have any questions, you can let me know then. Okay. So the program is called Not a Chance. And the whole point of this is to help people understand what really happens when you're gambling, the risk factors that people might face. I think it's going to be dually relevant to most of you. Because I know you do work a lot with children, and that is part of the population that we are targeting when we talk about gambling. Most people don't realize that young children are already gambling through their video games and all sorts of things. I don't have it up here, but I will tell you that there has been an increase in child gambling problems of over 4 times in the last couple of years. So not a statistic we really want to know anything about, wish we didn't have to have, but it is there. So this program was developed in conjunction with a social media campaign as well. So what you're going to see is the slides or the ads that were used on the social media campaign with just some additional information about each thing. We start with just what is gambling, right? And that's just when you risk anything of value. Okay, and knowing you could lose. Okay, people will gamble anything, their cars, their money, heirlooms, whatever they can find that's valuable. Problem gambling comes into play when you're willing to do those things when you know it's hurting yourself, you know it's hurting the people around you. Am I in your way?
No,
okay, you know it's hurting the people around you, and not that you don't care, but there's a desperation factor and you continue to do it anyway. Okay. All right. There we go. So this ties in with our drug and alcohol prevention programming because gambling activates that same pleasure center in the brain as drugs and alcohol, whether it's heroin, cocaine, alcohol, does not matter. It all works the same way. Okay. So what ends up happening is something comes into the brain here and says, hey, I like that. And all this dopamine is released just like it is when you're using drugs or alcohol. The difference with gambling is that, well, when you use drugs or alcohol, the dopamine is released in response to that substance, right? So your body takes it in and it's like, hey, this is cool. When you are gambling, you do not have to win for this to happen. This happens when you are expecting to win. So the reason this becomes problematic is because people who have a gambling addiction always believe they're going to win. So this happens in the brain every single time they try. Okay. And that ends up becoming a pretty big problem. Okay. For the younger people that you guys might work with, children, teenagers, things like that, they're, like I said, they're already gambling through video games. Some of them are already using or already doing like scratch off tickets that their parents buy, things like that. In some of these cities that we go into, we see kids playing dice on like sidewalks and things like that. This is a problem because their brains are not developed. Children's brains are not developed and won't be until, new research says, about 28 to 30 years old is when the brain becomes fully developed. So their risk of addiction is so much higher. The other piece of that is that if they start engaging in these behaviors early, they do risk their prefrontal cortex not completing its development, which creates issues with personality, decision-making, not having impulse control, all those things that are going to affect them later in life. Okay, so this is why gambling has become such a hot button issue for young people. It's hard to get teachers to talk about it. It's hard to get parents to talk about it because it doesn't seem like a relevant topic for children. But it is. That's really the bottom line. It is. Okay. So addiction just means we have an abnormal dependence on something that is either physically or psychologically habit forming. Okay. When this happens, it actually changes the way your brain functions. Okay. On the left side of each of those graphics, on the left, you have a brain that is looking towards the right. That is the right side forward. And on the left side, it's top down. All those yellow, reddish colors, that's all dopamine. That's supposed to be there. Okay. On the right, those are addicted brains, and you can see that they do not have that. What the brain does is when it becomes addicted to something, it stops creating or producing dopamine spontaneously and in normal environments and starts to produce it only in response to the thing that someone is addicted to. So the brain does not function the way it's supposed to. Okay. It is also, gambling addiction is also now included in the DSM-5. For those of you who are not familiar with that, that is the manual that physicians use to diagnose mental health disorders. It is now included in there as a diagnosis, very closely related with gaming disorder. So with kids, that's where this is becoming very closely correlated. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 specific types of gambling. And this is where it starts to seem like it's not relevant to kids. Some of it will be relevant to some of you, but they're doing these things. Most of these things that are done online, no one is checking IDs. And no, well, they'll check it if you win, but that almost never happens. So kids just go on and play and play and play. They click the little button that says, yes, I'm 21, and no one checks it. Okay. So here we have whether or not the odds are in your favor. I think most of us know the answer is no, right? But it does change based on the game you're playing. Are you able to pull up where I can see my notes? If not, I can do it over here. Okay, that's fine. I'll do it. I can keep talking while I do that. Okay. Okay. The odds of winning vary based on the game you are playing. And we're going to see that a lot of them are really low, and I think some of them will surprise you and be much higher than you expect. Come on, give that a second. We will start with slot machines, okay? When you are playing slot machines, your odds are anywhere from 1 in 5,000 to about 1 in 34 million, okay? Of when you're using the maximum play option, right? So that's when you're sitting at a penny machine or a nickel machine, but you're betting the max, which is not a nickel or a penny, right? And your odds of winning are pretty low, okay? The problem with that is, especially when you're in a casino, those machines make noise and lights and all the fun things all the time. It's made to look like everyone around you is winning, right? And they do, but not a lot of money, right? So what the casinos do is there's a payout. There's fairly often payouts, but they're small because that's what keeps people coming back. Well, I won a little bit, I can win a little bit more, okay? For table games, the odds are really variable, but all less than 50%, okay? And then for the lottery, smallest percentage of winning. And I'll give you some more statistics on that as we move forward. Table games, okay, are, well, anything like this, craps and other dice games, blackjack, card games, roulette, all those games are considered table games. And people lose a lot of money on these, but they also have fairly high chances of winning. So blackjack actually has anywhere from 42 to 49% chance of you winning. Others are smaller. Craps, the odds can be as high as 49%, okay? And roulette, the odds are 38 to 1, but the casinos only pay out at 35 to 1. So 4 of those numbers on the wheel really, or 3 of those numbers don't even really count. So that's, yeah, that's how people lose all this money, right? So, right, exactly. There's something called the expected value, okay? And that's what a person can be expected to win over time. And I know you guys can't see my notes, but you know, the probability of winning any bet can be as high as 87%. So sometimes people will read that and be like, I'll take my chances, right? But the house edge really makes sure that that can't happen. Okay, is everyone familiar with what that is? So the house edge is something that casinos and the gaming industry have implemented to ensure that they do not lose money. It is statistically impossible for people to win large sums of money over time. It cannot happen. It's done by mathematical algorithms and equations and all sorts of things that I'm not going to pretend to understand entirely. But like the example I have on here, so the expected value is calculated as the expected winnings over multiple bets. So that 87%, if you go up a few numbers, that expected value actually becomes like negative 1.67. So your odds of winning over time are actually less than 0.
So the expected value calculated at one sitting. In other words, if I'm sitting at a blackjack table for a long period of time, then the expected value goes up. It's not if I go to blackjack every week.
Well, but every play is going to be a turn, right? Because you have to pay for each one. So it's every single time you bet that it gets calculated by. So yeah. So it's not necessarily done by time, because in that time, let's say you sit there for 10 minutes. I mean, how many hands could you play? It's calculated by the number of times that you bet. Yeah. Okay. So again, they make it look like you can win, but you can't. It's statistically impossible. So lottery has the lowest chance of winning. Okay. Whether it's Powerball, whether it's scratch off tickets, whether it's any of the other big games. And lottery, I think, is a really interesting form of gambling because there's so many different ways to do it, right? The other thing that has become interesting about the lottery is that not anywhere, but a lot of places that you can buy lottery tickets now, they now have gaming rooms. Have you guys seen these? Okay, so there are convenience stores gas stations now that have rooms with like slot machines. It's like a whole room off the main convenience store, right? Yeah, and they're full of cameras, and I mean it's a whole thing.
Are these the games of skill that they advertise, or?
No, I don't know of any slot machines that are games of skill.
Because I've seen them actually.
No, that's okay. I just don't know of any of those.
Yeah, I've seen them in convenience stores every now and then.
Yeah, so I know I live in Lehigh County, so I'm not familiar with any that are out here, but I know there's one convenience store right across from the Rothrock car dealership, the one that was just all redone. If you go into that store, there's an entire room on the backside that is nothing but machines. And people will go in and buy food and just hang out there in a store. Like, so the accessibility is really easy, and becoming easier because the laws have been changed to allow these machines in convenience stores and truck stops and laundromats and everywhere else. But scratch offs are one of the most addictive lottery types out there. And it's not because of winning or losing. It's the actual act of doing them that people become addicted to. And a lot of times people think like scratch offs aren't a big deal, right? They'll give them to kids in their Christmas stockings or in birthday cards or things like that, right? Because they seem so harmless. They seem so harmless, but they're not. And scratch off tickets, the different games all have different probabilities of winning. And that is calculated by the total number of tickets and the total number of prizes available. There's no way to know where those tickets will be sold, how many establishments have X number of winning tickets. No one knows that information. It's all pretty random. But when kids are allowed to start doing these things, they're being introduced to a potentially addictive behavior with an undeveloped brain. So, the chance of winning the Powerball in the United States is currently 1 in 292.2 million. Okay, so, but and we laugh because that sounds absurd, right? But how many people do we know that are buying Powerball tickets every week? 20 bucks here, 40 bucks there, right? Because it's always a chance, you know, so it does happen that way. Okay. This slide just talks about the fact that most people, a lot of people, especially older people who start gambling, do it because of some sort of financial distress. They're trying to make money, get themselves out of debt, things like that, and really have kind of backed themselves into a corner and think that they're not able to help themselves in another way. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to start talking really fast. This is the house edge that we talked about, okay? It exists in every casino with the Pennsylvania lottery. It's everywhere, okay? There's no way around it, okay? Problem gambling is less of an issue for people who are able to set limits, okay? If you're going into a casino, I'm taking 50 bucks, 100 bucks, whatever you can afford, and when that's gone, it's gone. I'm leaving. Or, you know, I'll go hang out with my friends, but I'm good with that, and then it's done, okay? They're good with setting limits, knowing what they can and can't afford, and being able to stick with those limits. These last two sides are probably, I think, the most important. Gambling addiction affects almost every other aspect of life, okay? Many people end up with legal trouble. Gambling addiction is almost always co-occurring with either substance use disorder or another mental health disorder. Physical health comes into play. I'll give you just a couple quick things on here. Okay. One study found that alcohol use disorder is the most frequently reported co-occurring among those with a gambling disorder. 75% of those with a gambling disorder were also found to have an alcohol use disorder. That's a pretty big number, especially when we're talking about kids starting to gamble early. And 40% have another drug use disorder. Cocaine is the most, aside from alcohol, cocaine is the second most used among problematic gamblers. it's a stimulant. It keeps you awake. You can sit at the table all night, do all those kinds of things. So that does make sense. And there's some other stuff on there. If anyone has other stuff or wants to see the rest, I can show you. And then we have risk factors for gambling addiction. Now, in older adults, I think it's like 40% do gamble. Only 2% tend to become addicted. So it's a low risk of addiction in older adults. The most common types of gambling for older adults are things like bingo, things that, and it's all, sorry, it's all, it's centered around like social activities and trying to keep people social and things like that. So, but only 2% are likely to become addicted. However, some of the risk factors increase those chances, right? Other mental health disorders, your age, anyone's age, or the age that they start gambling. Gender, males are much more likely to have a gambling addiction than females. Medications, dopamine agonists. These are medications that are used to treat things like Parkinson's disease and restless leg syndrome. And they have a potential side effect of compulsive behavior, things like shopping, eating, gambling, those types of things. So for people who are using those types of medications, that's something to be aware of. Obviously, stress, and people who win at gambling early are at a higher risk of addiction because they've learned that it works that way. Okay. Helpline, 1-800-GAMBLER, and there is also a chat line for anyone who is tech savvy. I'll stop because I saw her take the picture. Okay. All right. So that is the whole thing. I think we made it pretty close. Thank you. I'm going to stop there and give you guys a second to ask questions. I am, however, going to bring up this other slide. I have a QR code and a website up here. Come on. Now that you got to see the whole thing in reverse. Okay, so there's a QR code and a link up there to our survey. If you guys could please do me a favor and go to that link and complete the survey for the presentation, I would really appreciate it. That just gives us a lot of feedback, especially since this was our first one. So we can make adjustments if we need to moving forward.
Oh, I have to take it down. I have to bring somebody on who just signed in.
Okay. So that'll come back up in a second though, right? We can bring it back up once you let them in. Okay. If not, I will have it here for anyone who needs to scan it. Okay. And fill it out.
So we'll open it up to questions here for the next 10 minutes or so. I guess we'll have to rethink our bingo game next week, huh?
Sorry, everyone.
In the long run, the elderly people are having less heart problems with the new electronic machines. They don't have to pull the handle.
Yeah, there's no levers anymore. But that also increases because all you have to do is, like, you literally have to do nothing. And that's how some of the kids' video games work now. Their thumb just goes and goes and goes and goes. So it's a little too easy, I think. Because those levers used to be heavy. Yes.
How many statistics? I mean, you want to do slots, you got to drive over to the casino.
Sure.
Buy lottery.
Yeah.
Drive to the street. If you want to do online gambling,
Mhm.
I could do it now or
Yeah.
while we're here. But like, do you have any statistics as to what percentages, of gambling problems are focused on those 3 different areas that you mentioned?
I do, but I don't have them here. I will tell you that online gambling and things like online sports betting are skyrocketing. And that's probably going to be a pretty hot topic in the next year. So that's when I imagine we'll see more of those statistics. But since COVID, online gaming has it's gone up astronomically. And now even for table games, things like poker, you actually can do that online now. You get like a virtual seat in an actual casino. You don't even have to go. Yeah. What I'll do is when I get back to the office, if I find that stat, I will send it over and then he can share it with you.
I mean, it seems pretty logical that the
It is,
online is,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, just skyrocketing to
Mhm.
continue. I just wonder why
And
the,
people they don't even have to get off their sofa anymore.
yeah.
Before, people, I don't want to drive over there. I don't want to deal with the people. I don't want to sit in the smoke-filled casino, so I just won't go. Well, now I can go, but not go. So,
So I guess the revenue that's generated exceeds the human devastation that it caused.
oh, the revenue from the gaming industry is in the billions upon billions of dollars. Now, a lot of it's tax revenue, which is not the worst thing for a lot of communities, but it is high. Yeah. Which is why, even knowing all these issues, the gaming industry is thriving,
So I have two questions.
Sure.
One is regulations. Okay. I mean, what is evolving with regulations? And
A great answer as to why. A lot of it, I think, comes down to money. The Pennsylvania lottery does, there's a lot of tax money from stores that sell the lottery tickets and things like that. And the Pennsylvania lottery has that their slogan that says, helping older Pennsylvanians and all the things. So part of it, I'm sure, is used to fund certain programs. But there is just so much money involved in gambling that the country and the states are not gonna. No. And they've not, they did raise the age to 21 from 18. Now you can still gamble at 18 in certain circumstances, certain games, things like that, but with the rise of the online stuff, there's not a lot of regulation. I go into high schools and they're like, I just say, yes, I'm 21. That's all you have to do to get in. And no one cares unless you're winning. They don't care. Right?
Actually, the question was almost already answered, because I was going to say the whole push of the Pennsylvania lottery was that the money was going to go to help seniors and other, and how much money
Actually does
percentage wise
that?
is doing that?
I don't know. That is something that is on my list to find out, but it's not as easily accessible as you might think. Yeah.
So I do know that the casinos, and I only know this because of our local, the casinos have to pay hospitality.
okay, and that goes back to cities and counties, right? Which is then used discretion
of
right,
those
of those
municipalities
cities and counties. So that's not always directly to seniors
Correct.
or nonprofits.
Right. Well, the casinos are different than the lottery, right? So the lottery is supposed to be used for seniors. Casinos goes, like you said, back into the municipalities where they're located a lot of times. Now, the state does get plenty from the casinos as well. I don't know the exact breakdown. No.
I always thought lottery was a tax on people who didn't understand math. But it is
You're not
kind of
wrong.
a tax.
It is.
It is kind
You're
of a
not wrong.
tax. And it does some good things, but they couldn't call it a tax. So it's a tax that's been dressed up.
And the other thing especially with scratch offs is they're cheap. So people in low income communities, they have $2 to go try and win 10. They have a really hard time saving that 2 and getting another 2 and things like that. So that's where we end up in this spiral where I mentioned financial distress. That's how almost everyone starts with a gambling problem. They need to make money, or they're in debt, or they're just desperate. Yeah.
So kids that are gambling have to have a debit card or somebody's credit card. To gamble.
They do. Well, here's how this works most of the time. Everyone has an iPhone or an Android or whatever it is these days, right? Kids included. And because they all use Google Play or the App Store or whatever, they're all hooked up to an account, usually with a parent credit card. The games that they are gambling with, they're smart, okay? It's $2 here. It's $4 there. It's things that most parents aren't batting an eye at. They also aren't well educated a lot of times on what the kids are doing, and what's $2 or what's, sometimes in some cases, kids, especially in high schools, they have their own debit card or card, whatever they're using that is funded somehow. So no one's monitoring what they spend. What we see a lot of in kids is they're buying things like loot boxes in video games, which is where you're basically spending money to try to win a character or an outfit or something. You know, that's pretty much where that money gets spent. Trying to get different outfits for characters, things like that, but they're not that expensive at one time. That's why they go unnoticed.
Time for another question or two.
I was wondering, now, you gave it all the reasons what are bad with, divorces, this, whatever it might be. Is there any statistics you have, your opinion on criminal activity? I mean, I read what happens up in Bethlehem. They get bad actors, they come out of these buses, arrest people.
Sure.
But of thousands of people that go there, and everybody's making money, the state, pardon my English, taxes the hell out of these places.
They do.
I knew a guy on the commission when they first started, a friend of mine was on the commission. He said, we just tax these
They
people
do.
that you wouldn't believe,
Sure.
which doesn't bother me. But I'm more interested in the criminal activity and things that really affect the society seriously.
Are you asking me about the criminal activity that goes on in the casino, or the criminal activity that people?
That is related.
So very often people who have a gambling addiction will end up with legal troubles, because when they are in that deep part of addiction and don't really have money to gamble, they will borrow money that they can't pay back. They will steal things. They will steal anything they can get their hands on to sell and make money to gamble. They will rob people. It happens actually quite a bit once they get deep into that addiction, out of that desperation mode. So yeah, that absolutely happens. And then when you add in the substance use disorder that co-occurs pretty often with it, all sorts of criminal or illegal activities start to come into play there.
Everybody has an addiction. You gotta conduct your revenge by playing that.
Well, that's gambling too. Yeah.
Figure out the seriousness of it. I know it's not good, but I don't know. There's good points and good points and everything.
Well, and there are, and as long as, I mean, listen, not all gambling is bad. And I don't want to give anyone the impression that it is. If you are able to set limits and have fun and walk away and it doesn't negatively affect your life, that's great. But especially when we're talking about young children, we're setting them up for missing the ability to set those boundaries. And just trying to make people aware that this can happen to anyone, and does. But yes, it's not all bad.
One more.
Anybody?
Thank you so much.
Oh.
So what can we do besides, so what can we do as a group of Kiwanians to help be better educators and role models for our young people?
Yeah.
What can we do? Because I'm really concerned about the sports betting,
Yes.
especially with that
Yes.
teenage into
Yep.
college age.
Yep.
It-
Yep.
I think that's setting up
Yeah.
a lot of those kids for.
I think it comes
Trouble.
down to education, whether it's the kids, which they're going to hear you, but maybe not quite understand yet, but definitely parents. I was saying in the beginning, I'm not overly familiar with the kind of things you guys do in terms of clubs and things like that. Bill was educating me a little bit. But if you can go into some of these clubs and give them this information, or even, ask us to come in one day when you're working with these kids, it's really just about getting it out there and helping the adults that work with these kids, their parents, their teachers, their coaches, realize that this is real. And it's not irrelevant just because they're children. In fact, I think it's more relevant because they're children. But I think those things are what it comes down to, and not being afraid to push back a little, because you're going to hear they're just kids. It doesn't matter. You're going to hear that. Right. And just being comfortable saying, no, this really is important. Yeah. So this particular program is brand new. We have another one though. We have one that I've been doing for a couple of years. I struggle to do it. I don't have very many schools that are willing to have me come in and do it. It's called CGAP, which is the Cyber Gambling Awareness Program. That one I can do in high schools. I can do in lots of different places. This one is not for high school students. This one has age limits on it, but CGAP I can do in high school, but I get a lot of pushback. Yep, a lot.
Last question.
Does the Pennsylvania Youth Survey capture the gambling data? Do you
Oh, I
know?
will have to look. And
'Cause
not
that could
every
be a
school
good-
does it.
I was just gonna say that could be a
Yeah.
good inroad.
Yeah,
to
it could be.
districts.
It could be. I will check, but I don't. That's a good question. I have to check. I'll check on that. But like I said, not everybody does the pays, so I wish they did.
Thank you very much, Jillian.
Thank you.
Very informative and
Thank you.
pertinent. Getting children early, it makes a big difference. And like they say, when when Roger said we're all addicted, when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping
Yes.
or whatever. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.